Have you ever been truly alone in the deep woods? I mean, truly alone. No cell service, miles from the nearest house. What if then you caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of your vision? What if it was clearly human-shaped, but no matter if you approached or retreated, it never revealed its true form? My name is Jim Harrison. 28 years ago, in 1996, I was a fire lookout in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. I've never told anyone the full truth about what I experienced then, because no one would believe me. But tonight, I'll tell you, because I recently learned that I'm not the only one who's seen something in the forest. This is also a warning. If you ever find yourself alone deep in the mountains, remember this story. Something other than humans lives in the forest, and they are watching us, much closer than we think. In the summer of 1996, I was 19. To pay for college, I applied for a job as a forest fire lookout. The interviewer told me,
It's a job where you just watch the forest all day alone. The biggest problem will be enduring the boredom.
"Boredom?" Looking back, it's laughable. I was assigned to Lookout Tower number 6. On the map, it was just a dot, but in reality, it was a 20-meter tall wooden tower on a ridge at an elevation of 1,200 meters. It was a 2-hour walk from the nearest road. We communicated with other lookout towers by radio, but rarely met physically. It was a perfectly isolated environment. On the first morning, I hiked up the mountain path with a heavy backpack. The forest was deep and filled with silence. Occasionally, I heard the crunch of branches or the call of a bird. The moment I stepped into a world completely cut off from civilization, I felt a shiver down my spine. It was as if someone was watching me. Lookout Tower number 6 was more livable than I expected. The first floor was the living quarters, and the second floor was the observation room. Simple, but sufficient for one person. My daily routine was simple. Wake up at sunrise, make coffee, and go up to the observation room. Look around the forest 360 degrees with binoculars, checking for any signs of smoke. Report to base station by radio in the morning and evening. That was it. The first few days were indeed boring. All I saw was a sea of green forest. Occasionally, spotting a herd of deer crossing a meadow was my only entertainment. But on the morning of the 4th day, I saw them for the first time. Looking through my binoculars, I saw multiple shadows standing at the edge of the forest, far from any ordinary hiking trails. They were human-shaped, but I couldn't make out the details due to the distance. I picked up the radio microphone. "Tower 6 to Dave, can you hear me?"
Loud and clear, Jim. What's up?
"I see human figures at the edge of the forest. Not animals. They look like people, but..." After a brief silence, Dave's voice came back.
Jim, those are probably wild animals. Shadows and tree illusions can trick you, especially new guys. Just focus on signs of fire.
I looked through the binoculars again. The shadows were definitely there, but I followed Dave's advice and didn't pursue it further. At that time, I didn't know they would get a little closer each day. On the 5th day, the shadows were about 200 meters closer. By the 6th day, I could see more details through the binoculars. They were indeed human-shaped, but something was different. Their clothes were dark, as if they were wrapped in old rags, and they were completely motionless. No blinking, no swaying, no movement at all. On the morning of the 7th day, I contacted Sarah at Tower 4. "Sarah, strange question. Have you seen any unusual figures in your observation area?"
Figures? Hikers?
"No, not hikers. Still figures standing far from any hiking trails. There was a long silence.
Jim, have you been alone too long? The forest makes people lonely. Your mind can play tricks on you.
Again, a rational explanation, but I trusted my own eyes. On the 8th day, the shadows were 100 meters from the tower. At this distance, I could see them without binoculars. They stood in a small clearing, seemingly looking up at my tower. I counted them. There were 5. On the 9th day, I started marking red X's on my map. I wanted to record their positions. I thought there might be a pattern. However, as I marked them, I realized there was no pattern to their movement whatsoever. It was as if their only goal was to get closer to me. On the night of the 10th day, I tried to contact Mark at Tower 3. Mark, can you hear me? Strange question, but
What is it, Jim?
have you seen anything unexplainable in your area?
Unexplainable?
Something human-shaped, but clearly not normal. Over the radio, Mark sighed deeply.
Jim, when I was new, I thought I saw all sorts of things too. Loneliness has a strange effect on the mind. The important thing is to distinguish between reality and imagination.
I gritted my teeth. No one believed me. But then, static started to interfere with the radio. Mark, can you hear me? Z. Mark, the radio fell completely silent. I tried other frequencies. Base station, Tower 4, Tower 3. Nothing connected. It was as if I had been cut off from the world. That night, I looked out the window. In the moonlight, 5 shadows stood directly below the tower, 50 meters away. They were looking up at me. On the night of the 11th day, it was a new moon, and the forest was completely dark. I had my flashlight and flare gun ready. I couldn't see anything in the darkness outside the window, but I was certain they were there. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound from below the tower. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like something scratching wood. I froze. Were they trying to climb the tower? The sound continued, with a steady rhythm, as if something was scraping the tower's support beams. Panicked, I grabbed the flare gun. I opened the window and pulled the trigger, aiming into the pitch-black forest. A red light illuminated the night sky, staining the entire forest crimson. In that instant, I saw the 5 shadows below the tower retreat in unison, and the scratching sound stopped. As the flare's light began to fade, I realized something terrifying. The flare had landed on dry branches, and a small fire had started to burn. A fire! I quickly grabbed the fire extinguisher and rushed down the tower. I frantically moved the furniture I had used as a barricade, opened the door, and burst outside. The fire was small, but in the dry forest, it could spread rapidly. I sprayed the extinguisher and managed to put out the flames. When the smoke cleared, I looked around. The shadows were nowhere to be seen, as if they had melted into the night. However, when I looked up at the tower's support beams, my blood ran cold. On the surface of the wood, there were clear marks, as if something with claws had scraped them. The next morning, the radio came back on with the sunrise. Tower 6, this is base, respond. I took the microphone with a trembling hand. This is Tower 6. Dave, can you hear me?
Jim, we couldn't reach you last night. What happened?
I explained what had happened last night. The presence of the shadows, their approach to the tower, the firing of the flare, and the small fire.
Calm down, Jim. We're sending a rescue team. Stay put.
Hours later, I heard the sound of an engine. The rescue vehicle was approaching on the narrow forest road. I sighed with relief. Finally, I was free from this nightmare. When the rescue team arrived, they investigated the area around the tower, the fire extinguisher residue, the burnt flare casing, and the claw marks on the tower's support beams.
What's this?
Tom, the team leader, pointed at the beam. Those are the marks they left. I explained. Tom frowned.
They?
The shadow beings. They got closer every day, and last night they finally tried to climb the tower. The rescue team members exchanged glances. Their expressions were not the understanding I had hoped for, but rather sympathy and concern.
Jim,
Tom said gently.
you've been alone for 10 days. Isolation has a big effect on a person's mind. These claw marks are probably from a raccoon or a bear.
But they were human-shaped. There were 5 of them.
All right.
Tom put a hand on my shoulder.
Anyway, you need rest now. Get in the car.
I turned and looked up at the tower. In the bright daylight, it certainly looked like just a wooden structure. But I knew, when night came, they would return. The car engine started, and we left the forest. Looking back from the back seat, Lookout Tower 6 was swallowed by the green of the forest, disappearing from view. As the rescue vehicle descended the mountain road, I kept looking out the window. The forest looked peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and birds flew from branch to branch. It was a calm afternoon, as if the terror of last night had been a lie. However, the moment the car crossed the forest boundary, I felt a strange sensation, like an invisible thread had been cut, a sense of liberation, but also a feeling of loss. Tom looked back from the back seat.
Jim, you were a good lookout. Your reports were meticulous, and you handled last night's fire quickly. But
What?
the loneliness of the forest is more powerful than you think. It's not uncommon for new people to have experiences like yours. The important thing is to distinguish between reality and imagination.
I nodded, but questions swirled in my mind. Those claw marks were real. The scratching sounds, the shadows standing below the tower, they were all real. But no one believed me. The car continued towards town. As the lights of civilization came into view, the memories of the forest seemed to gradually fade, but they never completely disappeared. Deep in my mind, those 5 shadows are still standing, below Lookout Tower number 6, waiting for the next lookout. When the rescue vehicle crossed the town boundary, I should have felt relieved. Streetlights, paved roads, people's activities, the signs of civilization were all there. Yet the heavy feeling deep in my chest didn't disappear. At the Forest Management Office, I underwent a formal debriefing. An official in a suit sat across the desk, reading my report aloud.
So, to confirm, Mr. Harrison, you claim to have spotted multiple unidentified human figures during your 10 days of duty, and that they approached the lookout tower at night.
I'm not claiming. It's a fact. The official lifted his glasses and looked at me.
Regarding the marks left on the tower's support beams, the on-site assessment suggests a high probability of wild animals.
Those weren't animal claw marks. They were more, shaped like human hands. The official sighed deeply.
Mr. Harrison, you were an excellent lookout. However, prolonged isolation affects human perception. It's a medically proven phenomenon. Nothing to be ashamed of.
I clenched my fists. No one believed me. They wanted to dismiss everything that happened right before my eyes as hallucinations due to isolation.
I recommend you take some time off.
The official said, tidying his papers.
Get some rest, both physically and mentally, and you can come back next season.
I stood up. There was no point in saying anything more. Back in my apartment in town, I tried to live a normal life. I found a part-time job, spent time with friends, and attended college classes. On the surface, everything was back to normal, but at night, it was different. Every time I lay in bed, memories of the forest came flooding back. Those 5 shadows, the scratching sounds from below the tower, the unnaturally still human figures illuminated by moonlight. I covered my room's windows with thick curtains because I couldn't bear to look at the darkness. When my friend Tony visited my apartment, he tilted his head.
Why is it so dark in here? It's like a basement.
I need to concentrate, I replied. I couldn't tell him the real reason. On the weekend, Tony invited me camping.
Let's go refresh ourselves. We can barbecue in the forest, sit around a bonfire, and talk. It'll be great, right?
My body shivered reflexively. Sorry, I'm busy.
Why? It's summer vacation, isn't it?
I'm just busy. Tony looked puzzled. I used to love hiking and camping, but now, just hearing the word forest made me break out in a cold sweat. My friends gradually started to avoid me. They couldn't understand. I couldn't explain to anyone what I was fighting. About a month later, strange things started to happen. My memories began to blur. It started with the details. Were there really 5 shadows? Or 4? Or 6? I definitely heard the scratching sound, but what time was it? I reread my diary from that time. Looking at my scribbled notes, there were inconsistencies between what I had written and what I remembered. Number of shadows, 5 confirmed, was written, but for some reason, I felt like there were only 4. Distance, 50 meters, was recorded, but I had the impression it was further. Was this what they called isolation-induced illusion? One night, I stood in front of the mirror. My haggard face stared back. Dark circles under my eyes, hollowed cheeks. What did you really see? I asked the reflection of myself. There was no answer. My friend Sarah, not the lookout from Tower 4, called, worried.
Jim, are you doing okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Your voice sounds strange. Is something wrong?
I hesitated whether to tell her or not, but in the end, I said nothing, just a little tired.
The forest job must have been tough, right? Being alone in the mountains like that, I could never do it.
At that moment, something shifted inside me. Could I talk about my forest experience as a tough job? Could I dismiss that terror as mere professional difficulty? Sarah, I said, what would you do if you experienced something no one believed?
What do you mean?
If something actually happened, but everyone around you insisted it was all an illusion. There was a long silence.
Jim, maybe you should talk to a counselor?
I hung up the phone. Again, no one understood. 2 months later, I spent more and more time at the library. I was researching materials on the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I rummaged through everything I could find, looking for similar experiences or similar reports from the past. While looking through old newspaper microfilm, I found an interesting article. 1987, fire lookout vanishes. According to the article, a lookout assigned to Tower 8 disappeared midway through his term. His last radio communication reported something in the forest, but by the time the rescue team arrived, the tower was empty. My heart pounded. Further research revealed other similar incidents. 1979, 1983, 1991. All were reports of inexplicable disappearances or unusual experiences involving fire lookouts. However, every case was ultimately dismissed as stress due to isolation, misidentification of wild animals, or misunderstanding of natural phenomena. There was a pattern. The authorities always provided a rational explanation, and the witnesses' testimonies were never credited. I stood in front of the copier, my hands trembling as I duplicated the article. I wasn't alone. Other people had seen them. At that moment, a voice spoke from behind me.
You're looking at some interesting materials.
I turned to see a man in his 70s standing there. He had white hair and deeply etched wrinkles. "Excuse me, can I help you?"
That article.
The man pointed to the copy in my hand.
The fire lookout disappearance, right?
I was wary. Yes, well. The man smiled, but his smile wasn't warm.
My name is Walter Griffin. I'm a former forest ranger. I've managed these forests for 45 years.
Is there something you need?
You're Jim Harrison, aren't you? The one who was at Lookout Tower 6 this summer.
My blood ran cold. How do you know my name?
It's a small town. Stories about young people seeing strange things in the forest spread quickly.
Walter sat down in the chair next to me.
Jim, would you like to talk about what you saw?
I hesitated. Would he laugh at me again? But there was seriousness in his eyes. Will you believe me?
I will.
Walter said quietly.
Because I've seen them too.
Walter and I moved to a quiet corner of the library. He pulled out an old notebook and turned the pages.
In 1965, when I was still new,
Walter began in a low voice.
I had a similar experience at Lookout Tower 3.
Similar?
Shadows in human form, getting closer day by day. Eventually, they came directly below the tower and tried to climb the building at night.
I leaned forward. So, what happened?
I ran.
Walter said with a bitter expression.
I abandoned my post and left the forest before my term was over.
And the shadows?
I don't know, but the lookouts assigned to Tower 3 afterward also reported similar things. In the end, Tower 3 was decommissioned in 1970. Officially, it was due to dilapidation, but
Walter opened another page. It was filled with handwritten notes.
Since then, I've secretly continued my investigation. In the past 60 years, at least 15 lookouts have had similar experiences.
15?
And 3 of them have gone missing.
A chill ran down my spine. Missing?
Tower 8 in 1979, Tower 5 in 1987, and Tower 9 in 1994. All of them mentioned residents of the forest in their last radio communication.
Residents of the forest?
That's what I call them. I don't know what they are, human or not. But one thing is certain.
What is it?
They are real.
Walter looked into my eyes.
What you saw was not a hallucination or an illusion.
I sighed with relief. Finally, someone believed me. Why do the authorities cover it up?
Fair,
Walter replied.
Unexplainable phenomena are inconvenient for the administration. They also affect tourism. So They just dismiss it without rational explanation.
I remembered the official's attitude then. Maybe he knew the truth too. Mr. Walter, I have a question.
Ask anything.
Why did you contact me? Walter looked at me for a long time. Then he opened his mouth heavily.
Because you survived. It's rare for someone to confront the shadows directly and leave the forest safely. Most of the time.
Most of the time?
They disappear, or they never speak of the forest again.
My heart pounded. Was I just lucky?
There's another reason.
Walter continued.
I have something I want to ask of you.
Ask.
I want you to go back to Lookout Tower 6.
My blood ran cold. What?
To find out their true nature. Not alone. I'll go with you.
I stood up. No way. I'm never going back to a place like that.
Jim, please listen.
Walter said calmly.
Even if you stay silent, they will continue to exist. And if a new lookout is assigned, the same thing will happen again.
I shook my head. It's not my problem.
Do you really think so?
Walter's words pierced me. I certainly thought about that forest every night. If a new lookout was assigned to Tower 6, would they experience the same terror? Let me think about it, I replied.
Of course.
Walter handed me a business card.
But there's not much time. A new lookout is scheduled to be assigned to Tower 6 next month.
I took the business card. It read, Walter Griffin, Forest History Researcher. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed Walter's story in my mind. 15 lookouts, 3 missing, and a truth that continued to be covered up. I survived Lookout Tower 6. But why me? What happened to the others? Looking out the window, the city lights twinkled quietly. This was a safe place. A fortress of civilization, completely isolated from the forest. But was that safety maintained by ignorance? I looked up the Forest Management Office's website online. There was a job posting. Fire Lookout wanted a Lookout Tower 6. As I read the application requirements, I remembered reading that same text 2 months ago. At that time, I thought the job was boring but high-paying. Now, someone else was reading the same text. They would apply, just like I did, without knowing the forest's true dangers. My phone rang. It was Walter.
Have you given it some thought?
Not yet.
Jim, you're a special person.
Special?
You confronted the shadows and survived. Not only that, but physical evidence remained. The claw marks on the tower should still be there.
I remembered the marks etched into the tower's support beams. Those were definitely real.
If the next lookout goes missing,
Walter continued.
Wouldn't you feel responsible?
I couldn't answer.
Think about it overnight. I'll call you again tomorrow night.
The call ended. I paced around the room. I was in a safe place, but my mind was restless. I turned on the TV, and a local news report was on. The topic was the approaching wildfire season. A reporter was talking about the importance of fire lookouts.
The unsung heroes who protect our city from wildfires.
I gave a cynical laugh. They were worried about wildfires, but the real threat was somewhere else. As the night deepened, I couldn't sleep. Every time I lay in bed, the memories of that forest resurfaced. But tonight was different. It wasn't just fear, but a sense of duty mixed in. I was the only one who knew the truth, and I might be the only one who could prevent the next victim. But why should I bear such responsibility? I was just an ordinary college student. I had no special abilities or courage, just an ordinary young man who was lucky enough to survive. However, as morning approached, one thing became clear. I never wanted to set foot in that forest again. But at the same time, I couldn't just stand by and watch someone else suffer there. With the sunrise, I made my decision. The next morning, I called Walter. I'll go back to Lookout Tower 6.
Are you sure?
However, I have conditions.
Let's hear them.
You come with me. I'm not going alone.
Of course. That was my intention.
And prepare an emergency escape plan. Car, radio, flare gun, everything.
Understood.
Finally, I took a deep breath. If anything happens to me, tell this story to others. Don't let it be covered up. There was a long silence.
Jim, you're a brave man.
I'm not brave. I just feel responsible.
That's what courage is.
We discussed the details. We would leave in a week, the day before the new lookout was assigned. We would report to the Forest Management Office that it was for equipment inspection and get a 2-day stay permit. After hanging up, I started packing my bags. Flashlight, spare batteries, flare gun, first aid kit, warm clothes, and a journal. This time, I intended to keep detailed records. My friend Tony visited my apartment.
Long time no see. Feeling better?
Yeah, slowly, but surely.
Good. So, this weekend, want to go camping? In the forest?
Actually, I cut him off. I have plans this weekend.
Plans?
I hesitated, but decided to tell him the truth. Partially, at least. I'm going back to the forest. Tony's face twisted in surprise.
What? You were scared of the forest?
That's exactly why I have to go back.
I don't understand.
If I don't face it, I'll be dominated by fear my whole life. That's what I think. This wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Tony looked at me worriedly.
Are you going alone?
No, I'm with an expert. It's a safe place, like camping. He seemed relieved.
That's good then. But don't push yourself too hard.
I know. After Tony left, I stood in front of the mirror. My complexion was better than 2 months ago, but in the depths of my eyes, determination and fear were mixed. Was I really doing the right thing? Or was I walking towards my death? The answer lay in the forest. All the answers were in Lookout Tower number 6. I double-checked my bags and waited for the day of departure. In the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, "Run," but a louder voice answered, "Fight." A week later, I was heading back to the forest, this time in search of the truth. October 15, 1996, 2 p.m. I was walking the forest path back to Lookout Tower 6. This time, I wasn't alone. Walter Griffin was walking beside me. At over 70 years old, his steps were steady, reflecting his 45 years of intimate knowledge of this forest. We were heavily equipped: radio, flares, powerful flashlights, night vision scopes, and a small camera. Walter emphasized the importance of leaving evidence repeatedly.
2 months since your first experience.
Walter said as we walked.
Their pattern might have changed.
What do you mean?
The shadows might be learning. They might remember how you escaped last time.
A chill ran down my spine. Learning shadows? That implied they were more than just wild animals or natural phenomena. When the lookout tower came into view, my heart started pounding. The red roof, the steel supports, and the observation deck. Everything was exactly as I remembered it.
Are you all right?
Walter looked at me with concern. Yes, just. I took a deep breath. Just remembering 2 months ago. We surveyed the area around the tower. The claw marks on the support beams were still clearly visible. Walter meticulously photographed them and measured them with a tape measure.
They're the size of human hands,
Walter murmured.
but the claws are unusually long, over 5 centimeters.
I touched the marks. The terror from 2 months ago resurfaced. Mr. Walter, what are they, really?
That's what we're here to find out.
At dusk, we took up positions on the observation deck of the lookout tower. We checked our equipment and confirmed the radio was working. We were supposed to contact the Forest Management Office every 30 minutes.
What time was your first sighting?
Walter asked. Around 8 p.m. They were first in the distance, in the shadow of a large pine tree.
I see. About 30 minutes after sunset.
Walter checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. In 30 minutes, my nightmare might begin again. I peered through the night vision scope. The forest was enveloped in silence. No birds chirping, no wind rustling. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Mr. Walter, I said, my voice trembling. Something's wrong.
What is it?
There's no sound. It was the same last time. Before they appear, the forest falls completely silent. Walter nodded.
The animals probably sense danger instinctively.
Exactly 8 p.m. I confirmed the first shadow through the night vision scope. There it is, I said, holding my breath. Northeast direction, in the shadow of a large pine tree. Walter raised his binoculars.
I see it. It's definitely human-shaped, but its movement is unnatural.
The shadow moved from tree to tree, but its movement wasn't human. It glided over the ground, silently. Second one, I reported, from the west side.
I've confirmed it too. Is the camera recording?
Yes. However, when we checked the camera footage later, the shadows weren't clearly visible. They were only recorded as blurry black masses. The number of shadows gradually increased. 3, 4, and then 5. The same number as last time. 9 p.m. The shadows began to approach the tower.
There's something interesting.
Walter said in a low voice.
Look at their positioning.
I checked the shadows' positions with the night vision scope. Indeed, it wasn't random. They were positioned at equal intervals in a pentagonal formation around the tower. It's like a ritual, I murmured.
Exactly. This is a deliberate action.
What surprised me most was that they were more cautious than last time. Instead of moving all at once, they approached one by one, gradually.
They're learning.
Walter said.
They remember how you escaped last time.
10 p.m. The shadows had approached within 50 meters of the tower. At this distance, I could clearly see their details. They were human, but not ordinary humans. Their height was average, but they were abnormally thin. They wore clothes, but they were tattered and old, impossible to date. And what was most striking was their movement. They were completely silent. No footsteps, no rustling of clothes, no breathing sounds, nothing was audible. Mr. Walter, I said, my voice trembling, are they alive? Walter stared through his binoculars for a long time. Then he opened his mouth heavily.
I don't know, but one thing is certain.
What is it?
They are watching us.
That was true. All 5 of them were looking up at the observation deck of the lookout tower. Their eyes, glowing in the darkness, were fixed on us. 11 p.m. The shadows were directly below the tower. Just like last time, the scratching sound began, a high-pitched sound of metal and claws scraping. But this time, we were prepared.
Are you recording?
Walter confirmed. Yes, both audio and video. We suppressed our fear and continued our scientific observation. The shadows' actions had a clear pattern. First, one would begin to climb the support beam. The other four would move in a circle around it. There was a division of roles between the climber and the watchers.
They're organized.
Walter said as he recorded.
This isn't just animal behavior.
When the climbing shadow reached within 5 meters of the observation deck, we saw their face clearly for the first time. It was indeed a human face. But it wasn't the face of a living human. The skin was gray, the eyes deeply sunken, and the expression was completely blank.
Let's try to talk to them.
Walter suggested. What?
Let's ask them directly what they want, why they come here.
I wanted to object, but it was the only way. I stood at the edge of the observation deck and called out to the climbing shadow. What do you want? Why do you come here? The shadow stopped moving. Then, it slowly raised its head and looked at me. At that moment, a voice echoed in my head. Not words, but something communicated directly to my consciousness. Vigil, duty, eternity. It was a fragmented message, but its meaning was clear. They were lookouts, but not ordinary lookouts. They were beings eternally watching something. Mr. Walter, I said, my voice trembling. Did you hear that?
Hear what?
A voice in my head. At that moment, all the shadows stopped moving in unison, and then they slowly began to move away from the tower. After the shadows disappeared into the depths of the forest, Walter and I spent the rest of the night on the observation deck. What happened? I asked.
You communicated with them.
Walter replied.
No one has accomplished that in the past 60 years.
But I don't understand. Vigil? Duty? What are they watching? Walter stared at the forest for a long time. Then he opened his mouth heavily.
This forest has an old history. In the late 1800s, there was a major wildfire here.
A wildfire.
Official records state it was a natural ignition, but in reality, it was man-made. Settlers set fire to the forest to develop what was a sacred indigenous site.
I gasped.
Many people died in the fire. Not just indigenous people, but settlers too. And some of those settlers, feeling responsible, vowed to continue watching over this forest.
Are those them?
Likely, they've been fulfilling that promise to watch over this forest forever.
I remembered the claw marks left on the tower's support beams. Perhaps they weren't marks of aggression, but desperate attempts to hold on. But why do they attack lookouts?
They're probably not attacking,
Walter said.
They're verifying to see if the new lookout has the qualifications to be a true watcher.
I was appalled. Qualifications?
Whether they have the will to protect the forest without succumbing to fear. They're testing them. Your initial escape was probably within their expectations.
So, by coming back this time,
you passed.
The next night, the shadows appeared again, but they were distinctly different from the previous night. They didn't approach the tower. Instead, they moved along the forest boundary, patrolling.
They're on patrol,
Walter observed.
You're seeing them do their real job.
I followed their movements with the night vision scope. Indeed, this was surveillance. Detecting anomalies in the forest and eliminating threats, they were performing the same duties as fire lookouts endlessly. Around midnight, the 5 shadows gathered below the tower, and then something unbelievable happened. They slowly bowed their heads towards us. It was a salute, a gesture of respect from lookout to lookout. I stood up and bowed my head in return. Walter followed suit. At that moment, the voice echoed in my head again. This time it was clear. Thank you. Continue. Protect. They understood that we had the will to protect the forest, and they were grateful. And they were entrusting that responsibility to us. The shadows disappeared into the depths of the forest. This time completely peacefully, quietly. We left the forest safely. On the drive back to town, Walter broke the silence.
So, what will you do with this experience?
I'll write a report. I replied. I'll keep an accurate record.
The authorities won't believe it.
I know, but the truth should be recorded. We organized the evidence. Photos, audio recordings, detailed notes. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to substantiate the experience. However, as expected, the Forest Management Office did not officially accept our report. It was merely recorded as an interesting anecdote. A year passed. I graduated from college and decided to major in forestry, to follow in Walter's footsteps and continue recording the truth of this forest. A new lookout was assigned to Tower 6. A 22-year-old woman named Sarah Collins. I gave her notes of caution beforehand. Of course, I couldn't tell her everything, but I warned her that strange things might happen in the forest. Fortunately, Sarah completed her term safely. According to her, she occasionally saw human figures but felt no danger. The shadows had approved of her. Currently, I work as a forest history researcher. I have followed in Walter's footsteps, continuing to investigate the hidden history of this region. Lookout Tower 6 is still active. Every year, new lookouts are assigned, and I give all of them the same warning. There are old residents in the forest. You don't need to fear them, but you should show them respect. Occasionally, strange experiences are reported by lookouts. However, there have been no disappearances recently. A kind of understanding may have been established between the shadows and us. I still visit Lookout Tower 6 once a month, under the guise of maintenance. In reality, it's to keep the promise with the shadows, to protect the forest, to not forget that responsibility. They are still watching, from the depths of the forest, quietly watching over us, as eternal lookouts, never resting. If you, reading this record, ever become a lookout in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, remember this: you are not alone. There are elders in the forest. They have been protecting this land for over 100 years. There's no need to fear them, but you must not forget to show respect. If you see human figures at night, don't panic. They don't intend to harm you. They are merely checking to see if you can become a true lookout. Continue your duty without succumbing to fear. Have the will to love and protect the forest. If you can do that, they will recognize you as a comrade. And someday, a new lookout will surely be assigned. When that time comes, please tell them this story. It doesn't matter if they don't fully believe it, just as long as they keep it in the back of their minds. The forest is alive, and those who protect the forest are also alive. Forever. Author's note: this record is based on real experiences that have continued from 1996 to the present day, 2024. Lookout Tower 6 is still operational, and I visit the site regularly. In these 28 years, No major incidents have occurred between the shadows and us. However, they have not disappeared. As night deepens, I can still see human figures moving in the depths of the forest. They continue to keep their promise. And we too must continue to keep that promise.